Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining us, taking an hour out of your lunch hour. So as we noted, I'm Matt Craig. I'm here with Brian Patterson. Before I even get started, I'd also like to really acknowledge that we aren't the only ones that are involved in any of this kind of stuff, and particularly on our team. Lots of folks behind the scenes working on things, and particularly wanted to recognize Lisa Josephson, who is a senior planner at TransLink, who led the development of much of the work that you all see together with urban systems. So today we are going to be focusing on rapid implementation of all ages and ability bike networks, and we will walk through the what is that, why would you do it, and how to do rapid implementation, and we'll make sure we've left some time for questions. Before we start, nice to maybe hear from you, who you are and where you're joining us from. So if you're able to join the slido.com, you can either scan that QR code on your screen or go to slido.com, and then the code is HBE. Give everyone a few seconds to get that down.
I don't see, oh, here's the question. Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Okay, so there you go. Once you've joined, Ontario quick out of the gate. Nice. Okay, great to see folks from, looks like not just BC, but across Canada. Okay, great. And then we're interested in kind of who's in the room. What's your background? What brought you to the webinar today? I know I'm really excited about this continual kind of intersection of public health and my area's transportation planning, and the massive amount of overlap there. Great, lots of public health, and then mix of others. And then whether you know about rapid implementation or not, something brought you here today. So curious, why are you excited about this topic? Here we go. Cool, great to see someone saying they are about to embark on this journey. Hopefully we're able to share some useful info. Safety is a big one, of course. Great. Yeah, lots and lots of reasons to be interested in this topic, and climate and safety and equity are certainly central to all of that. Great. And then I think this is the last one. What are you hoping to get out of it? Best practices, new ideas, advocacy, health benefits. Yeah. Great. Yeah, lots on how to kind of approach decision makers and move things forward. Eating bureaucratic roadblocks, sure. Cool. Well, I hope we will be able to touch on, if not all, many of those things. Great. Excellent. Okay, so I'll maybe just introduce what am I doing here if I work at TransLink. Isn't that just a transit agency if you're in the lower mainland? Next slide. It's not true. TransLink, it's Metro Vancouver's integrated regional multimodal transportation authority. And I have the honor of part of my job is really working to bring people and places together. So you may know TransLink mostly for the transit we provide. We've got hundreds of buses and the C bus and the SkyTrain and the West Coast Express. But we're more than just a transit provider. We own and maintain 5 bridges, 11 bike parkades, 350 individual bike parking stations. And then on the street side, we fund the operation and the maintenance of what we call the major road network. And as part of that, we partner with our local municipalities to invest in cycling and walking and making roads safer for all users. Next slide. And one of the ways that we do that is we invest. So last year we invested over 130 million in over 100 projects that were led and delivered by the municipalities across the region. And while lots of these partnerships may fly under the radar, they're really essential for helping to keep Metro Vancouver moving effectively and safely and sustainably. All of our work at TransLink and really within the region is guided by Transport 2050, which is our regional transportation strategy. This is our 30-year strategy that has specific strategies and actions to help get us to that next 30 years. It includes the overall theme of access for everyone. And then to support that, we've got 5 goals, each with specific targets. And those 5 goals include providing choices for everyone that are convenient, reliable, affordable, safe and comfortable, and carbon-free. And so rapid implementation of cycling infrastructure really helps to support nearly all of these goals. Next slide. Kind of drilling down from our 30-year strategy, we've got another document, Transport 2050 10-year priorities, which is our blueprint for what would really be an unprecedented level of investment in transit and transportation in our region that is going to help to achieve those big, ambitious Transport 2050 goals in time. So what do we need to do in the first 10 years? These priorities were approved by our Mayor's Council last summer and are really grouped around 3 kind of main themes: convenient, reliable, safe, and comfortable transit, people first streets, and building out a reliable and fast transit network. And the work we're doing now is to develop our next set of investment plans, which will confirm the funding and the prioritization for delivering on these 10-year priorities. So throughout the development of both Transport 2050 and the 10-year priorities, we heard from the public and from our decision makers that urgent investments are needed. We need to move quickly. And so in response, our 10-year priorities recommends we build out half of what was identified in our 30-year strategy in the first 10 years, building out half of a safe and comfortable major bikeway network in those first 10 years. Next slide. So Transport 2050 had taken a concept that was previously in our regional cycling strategy and has been one of the basis for our municipal funding program, and confirmed it into what we've called the major bikeway network. And this is 850 kilometers of safe and comfortable corridors connecting both between and then within regionally designated urban centers. Next slide. And so to help catalyze investment in cycling over the last few years, we've adapted our existing municipal funding program to include a specific stream focusing on rapid implementation. And it's resulted in really 2 great outcomes. One is new, safe, comfortable infrastructure, but also an opportunity to work with our municipal partners on how we apply this new approach. Next slide. And one of the ways we've done that to help support advancing investment in cycling, we're doing more than just providing funding. We're also helping to build capacity. And so this includes providing resources like the Rapid Implementation Design Guide that we're going to share some more information about. Next slide. So what is it? What's rapid implementation? Over the last few years, cities across Canada and throughout the world have really been increasingly shifting their approach to delivering bikeways by following a rapid implementation, or sometimes called a quick build approach. Next slide. These networks have often been implemented really quickly using approaches that focus on low cost, interim, temporary, and adjustable materials. If you're in our region, some recent examples include Beach Avenue in the city of Vancouver, and in the city of New Westminster, the Agnes Greenway, both of which we'll hear a little bit more about from Brian. Next slide. So kind of three main things to define these. Rapid implementation is fast. It's right in the name, rapid. And what that can do is to help to minimize both the construction impacts that are on the community. They get out there quickly. They're also flexible. They use flexible materials that allow changes as needed and help to adapt to challenges as they come up. And then finally, they're lower cost. We use lower cost materials that help make procurement and implementation easier and quicker, and ultimately allowing more rapid expansion of the network. You can get more kilometers for the same dollars. So why even do it? We all know there's many critical issues facing our communities, and rapid implementation approach has really become increasingly important during the pandemic. We've had cities around the world quickly reallocating road space to meet physical distancing requirements, and provide safe access to daily needs and outdoor recreation. Also recognizing that there's been changes in how people are getting around and the mobility patterns that we're seeing in our cities. The pandemic then exacerbated existing urban issues like climate change and public health and road safety and social equity. And so rapid implementation of cycling networks is really a key strategy that cities around the world can use to help address each of these issues in both being fast and urgent. Next slide. Another reason to work on this is we don't always get it right. We don't always know the answers. And so rapid implementation can provide us a great opportunity to try things out, to monitor and to adjust designs as needed based on feedback and users' lived experience. And it also requires communities to be somewhat willing to take more risks and willing to make mistakes and to learn. At the same time, being committed to making adjustments based on what we do learn. Next slide. Oh, I love the video on this one. It's quick to implement. It's right in the name, and with that comes a lower cost. So we know we need to have urgent action on climate change. Encouraging active transportation by rapidly expanding safe and comfortable networks is hugely important to achieve that goal. And then it can also help to inform longer term permanent designs. We get something out there, we learn from it, and then we build for more permanence. Next slide. It can also be a really powerful engagement approach. Rapid implementation gets things built, gets things out there, and it's an opportunity to interact directly with the project and the infrastructure, and then provide input as we're designing and as we iterate during implementation. Getting people out there to test walk or test bike a design can be hugely beneficial with this kind of project. A few on the benefits of rapid implementation. So there's been successful examples all across North America, including here in Canada, in Calgary, in Edmonton, and Victoria, and many others. Rapid implementation has also taken off really around the world. Many European cities have been investing in this approach, and they're seeing great outcomes, particularly in measured growth of active transportation rates. Here in Canada, important to recognize we're certainly not the first here in Metro Vancouver, and we're not the only ones doing this. Calgary and Edmonton both pioneered this concept of rapidly implementing downtown bike networks. In 2015, the Calgary City Cycle Track Network project saw cycling trips triple compared to 2014. In Edmonton, they rapidly implemented the downtown bike network, a pilot project that saw an 81% increase in downtown cyclists year over year. And in Toronto, a similar project had increases of 65% across 7 new routes, all of those that were then made permanent. So next slide, and I think that's over to Brian to walk you through the design guidelines we developed, and got some great photos to show what some of these look like. So over to you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Matt. And hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. I'll be getting into a little bit more of the details about what rapid implementation is and kind of the planning and design process to go through and some key considerations to think about as you're moving forward and implementing BIKEWAY facilities using a quick build or rapid implementation approach. So starting off with kind of some of the basis in design guidance and recognizing when we're looking at rapid implementation of BIKEWAY networks, we are focusing on all ages and abilities facilities or AAA facilities. So we're trying to make bicycle facilities that are comfortable for everybody and address some of the common barriers or concerns that many people have about cycling. And that's mainly that many people don't feel comfortable in painted bike lanes or shared roads where they're sharing the road with motor vehicles. So we're really looking at ways to reach out to that segment of the population that really wants to cycle more, but they require safe and comfortable facilities to do that. And there's typically 2 types of bicycle facilities that we look at when we're thinking about rapid implementation approaches. These are highlighted in the yellow box here. So on quieter streets, kind of local streets with lower traffic volumes and speeds, we can look at neighborhood bikeways, or sometimes called local street bikeways or bicycle boulevards, using traffic calming elements. And on busier streets, looking at protected bicycle lanes, so providing dedicated and physically protected space for cyclists. There's a number of other types of AAA facilities, things like multi-use pathways or bicycle pathways, but these aren't typically done through a rapid implementation approach. And then on the left are other types of bicycle facilities that aren't AAA. So we're really zooming in here on AAA treatments using a quick build approach on neighborhood bikeways and protected bike lanes. One thing we often hear about rapid implementation, sometimes you're using a lot of concrete barriers or flexible delineator posts and things like that. But it's important to recognize that rapid implementation does not mean lower quality. This is an example of the Adenac Street Bikeway in the city of Vancouver. And this was a quick build approach on a local street bikeway. And they used an activation that uses a number of interim materials and features that have several placemaking elements. Things like a mural, creative seating, table tennis, and skate dots or skateboard friendly elements as well. And so these elements are used to help actually restrict and divert motor vehicle traffic. This used to be a connection that motor vehicles could use. They closed that connection off, created a separated facility using really low cost materials, but added in some of those placemaking elements as well. So there's some design guidance available both locally and provincially and nationally, ranging on a spectrum from kind of more tactical types of projects through to permanent types of projects. So on the tactical side of things, if anybody's familiar with the term tactical urbanism and looking at some of the interventions a lot of cities did immediately at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, using really temporary and quick build materials. These are types of materials that would have been implemented in a matter of hours or days, but they aren't really permanent. They were only intended to be out there for a short period of time. And similarly with tactical urbanism, this is looking at really short-term interventions. And so there's a couple of design guidelines out there for the tactical side of things. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities published a COVID-19 street balancing guide, and TransLink also developed a tactical urbanism toolkit to provide guidance on that spectrum. And on the other spectrum, there's quite a bit of guidance available on kind of permanent or more intensive reconstruction and development of bikeway facilities. The Transportation Association of Canada has a national design guide called the Geometric Design Guide for Canadian Roads. And in British Columbia, we have the British Columbia Active Transportation Design Guide. But what some of these guidelines are missing is that what we're going to be talking about today, and really doing a bit of a deeper dive specifically on the topic of rapid implementation, which really kind of fits in between the tactical and permanent side of things. And what we're going to be focusing on for much of the presentation here is the Rapid Implementation Design Guide for BIKEWAYS in Metro Vancouver, which we worked on with TransLink and was released in November 2022. And the guide focuses on treatments using flexible, low-cost materials that are implemented rapidly within the existing roadway and with minimal construction requirements. So by kind of filling that spot in the middle, it's providing a gap in existing knowledge and research and guidance on how to actually kind of provide this facilities using a quick build approach. So just briefly, and this guide is available on TransLink's website for free download. It has 6 different sections, and we'll essentially walk you through a number of the sections that are in the design guide. There's an introduction. There's kind of a rapid implementation 101, which is largely what Matt was kind of speaking to earlier, the case for rapid implementation. And then what I'll be focusing on in the next few slides is getting into more detail about some of the key planning and design considerations. And then when you're actually implementing bikeways, what types of treatments or materials can you consider? And what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of those different types of materials? So we'll start with getting into some of the planning and design considerations if you're looking at implementing bikeways using a rapid implementation approach. And the guide outlines a number of guiding principles that you should be thinking about if you're interested in kind of moving forward with a rapid implementation project, recognizing rapid implementation is a powerful tool that can be used for quick and effective change, but it also has the potential to be disruptive or to negatively impact certain users and services if not properly planned. So as a result, there's a number of guiding principles to help make sure we're thinking about the needs of all road users and how to plan and design these successfully to kind of minimize any adverse impacts. And so kind of looking through some of these guiding principles, the first one looking at social impact, social equity, noting that rapid implementation projects can impact a wide range of street users. And in many cases, we saw during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of cities throughout North America and Europe were really focusing on social equity to help identify where they could identify rapid implementation projects to help have the greatest equity benefits and benefit the greatest number of people from an equity perspective. The next one is accessibility. Accessibility is a really fundamental consideration for any project, but is especially important given the rapid nature of change with a quick build project. So rapid implementation projects should make sure to prioritize universal design considerations at all stages of planning design and include accessibility stakeholders in the planning and design process. From a safety perspective, projects should be designed with safety in mind for people of all ages and abilities and for all road users. In terms of predictability, because these changes happen quickly, they should be intuitive and predictable so that people understand intuitively what the changes are and can adapt to those changes quickly. In terms of essential access and services, projects do need to consider, again, all the different various functions that a street has and all road users. And this can include things like emergency vehicles, transit, goods movement, waste management, and deliveries. And where possible, rapid implementation should avoid conflicts with these other users, or at least find ways to identify what those needs are of those other users and find ways to accommodate their needs or mitigate the impacts. Operations and maintenance is really critical, especially in many parts of the country with winter cities and snow clearing requirements, making sure that that's taken into consideration so that your designs are wide enough, for example, to accommodate snow clearing equipment. And then a final guiding principle, communications. As Matt mentioned earlier, rapid implementation by its very nature can be a powerful engagement approach. But as we're going through the process, making sure you're having ongoing communications and engagement with the public and with stakeholders so that you can identify how these facilities are working and learn from that and adapt and be committed to making changes based on what you've learned. There's a number of more specific design considerations that need to be considered as part of a rapid implementation project. So the first one is looking at available road space. And generally, when we're talking about rapid implementation, we're talking about what you can do quickly within your available curb to curb width. So you really need to know how much space do you actually have, because you're really trying to minimize capital works that would be shifting or moving curbs. So it's typically a matter of reallocating road space from either a motor vehicle lane or an on-street parking lane to another use, but working within that curb to curb width. You need to consider things like frequency of driveways and intersections, accessibility, as I mentioned, a really important design consideration, on-street parking, curbside access, presence of transit stops, street drainage and maintenance, and then what's actually possible and achievable within your available capital budget, as well as your ongoing maintenance budget. And so some of the pictures here show an example on the top. This is in Toronto of a kind of temporary loading zone that was provided and making sure it's accessible and at grade. So there's a loading zone, but instead of having a curb that you have to mount up and drop back down, which creates barriers for people with mobility challenges, this way there's a level surface so you can cross the bike lane to conduct your loading or access the sidewalk. And then on the bottom photo is an example in Burnaby where they were looking at quick build approaches to intersection modifications as well. So on top of a concrete roadside barrier, adding in some signal changes as well with a pedestrian and bicycle activated push button to be able to trigger the traffic signal. And this example here is from the city of New Westminster in the large photo here, which was looking at a quick build approach at a bus stop. And you can kind of see on the right where the original bus stop was. And in this case, they raised the bike lane to sidewalk level, just pouring some asphalt and pouring a marked crosswalk across this to create a safe space for cyclists and for pedestrians to cross the bicycle lane using kind of a quick build approach here, along with some education materials. The photo on the top left here is kind of showing a poster that was placed at the bus stop so people could kind of understand how to use this bus pad, as it was called in Westminster. So rapid implementation also kind of follows a different design process than what we would typically be used to in local governments. And on the left is what we would call a traditional approach, which municipalities often would take in the planning and delivery of major capital projects. But this traditional approach that kind of moves from a planning and concept design phase through to detailed design and through to implementation is a linear process that involves each of those phases, and along with communications and engagement, but it's often a multi-year process to go through that kind of three-step process. So the rapid implementation approach is quite a different approach and is aimed at getting infrastructure on the ground much faster from weeks to months instead of years. And its approach uses targeted engagement and follows a condensed planning and design process. So that's what you see in pink there, is really looking at some initial planning and design, identify what the project need is, engage with some targeted stakeholders, but not broad public engagement, and then develop a design quickly and really focus on implementing that design. And then your engagement actually happens after, your broad public engagement happens after you've gone through that rapid implementation. And that way you're really getting people's lived experience. They've had a chance to actually try the facility, use it, see what's working or not. But it requires, as Matt said, it requires the local governments to be committed to hearing that feedback and committed to actually making changes and adapting based on the input received and reporting back to the community about how the input that was used to make those adjustments. And then communications and engagement is really an ongoing part of that adaptation phase, as well as ongoing monitoring. So doing some post-installation counts as well. And again, making adjustments because these are low-cost adjustable materials to respond to the issues that you might identify. So another factor to consider with rapid implementation projects is there's often what we see is a bit of a political valley of public opinion here, and that's what this graph is showing. Often at the outset of a project, there can often be approval and excitement about a project, but there often can be a sharp response of concern immediately preceding and following the implementation. You can see the dip down after you make significant or disruptive changes to the street. And often when this happens, when you're kind of in the valley of public opinion, upset stakeholders and community members may begin voicing their displeasure, and that can sometimes sway political opinion. But over time, as the facility opens and people try it out and experience it and learn to adapt and adjust their own behavior, approval tends to increase, especially if those adjustments are made in response to the engagement and the input that has been received. So it's an important kind of commitment, and you need to have a bit of a longer term view and listen to the concerns that you might hear when you kind of go into that valley, but being committed to kind of the longer term view and responding to what you're hearing and learning from that to keep the project moving forward. So those are some kind of broader planning and design considerations. Now I'll talk more specifically about some of the engineering treatments and some of the treatments and materials you could look at when you're implementing a rapid implementation project. So there's a number of different treatments that can be used, and I'll walk through briefly kind of talking about each of them. But there's some advantages and disadvantages to each of the different types of treatments, and the design guide outlines a lot of these advantages and disadvantages for each type of treatment, thinking about key considerations like what is the relative level of protection, how safe and comfortable is the type of protection that's provided, what's the relative cost, relative durability, aesthetic considerations, installation considerations, and maintenance and drainage considerations. So the guide goes into quite a bit more detail about each of these, and we kind of outline this for each of the different types of treatments. So on the right, you can see this isn't an exhaustive list of treatments, but these are some of the more common types of treatments we've generally seen in Metro Vancouver and elsewhere in North America. And this graphic here is kind of showing a bit of a spectrum of treatments that can be considered based on their relative level of protection. So at the highest level here, we have what we call flexible delineator posts, which are helpful in making a more comfortable facility by providing some sort of physical separation, but especially on higher speed or higher volume roadways, it doesn't actually offer a high degree of physical protection. If a motor vehicle were to hit a flexible delineator post, it wouldn't necessarily provide a high degree of safety, but it does make it more comfortable and can be effective at getting more people cycling. And then this can range down to things like looking at curbs or concrete barriers, which can be more expensive and have other considerations, but offer a higher degree of protection. And the type of treatment you use, again, it comes down to a lot of the considerations I was outlining earlier, a main one being what are your capital cost and maintenance budgets, so, and what are the conditions of the roadway, and then what's the most appropriate type of treatment. So I'll kind of quickly walk through each of these different types of treatments, and with some larger photos, you can kind of get an example of what each of these look like. So this example here is looking at, again, a type of protection with a lower level of protection when we're looking at physical safety, but still can offer a degree of comfort. This is actually my son in the district of North Vancouver riding along the bikeway here, and he feels very comfortable with these flexible delineator posts. But as I mentioned, they do get knocked over if a car is to hit them. And so they do actually have fairly significant maintenance costs just because of the replacement costs that go along with them. So they may be initially quite expensive to install, but they have an ongoing cost that goes along with them. They're not very durable, but they're easy to implement. And so you can see some of those pros and cons of these different of these treatments here. If we kind of move up a step, you could have essentially a flexible delineator post, but with a bit of curbing. And in this case, it's an example of a modular plastic curb. So again, a fairly low level of protection if a vehicle were to actually hit that modular curb, but provides a level of comfort. And in this case, it's nice because it provides a continuous barrier as opposed to individual flexible posts. So there's a bit higher capital cost that goes along with this, along with moderate maintenance costs. It's fairly durable, but not as durable as kind of permanent curbs or barriers, but very easy to install. We can also have parking protected bike lanes. So this example here is really just using paint in and of itself. And it's a matter of kind of putting the bike lane between your sidewalk and on-street parking and providing a buffer zone. And so it can be as simple as this, as providing a buffer space using paint. So again, a fairly good level of protection if you have quite a bit of on-street parking, a low capital cost, low maintenance cost, and quite easy installation. We can use things like planter boxes. This is often done in combination with other treatments. They can provide a moderate level of protection and kind of moderate capital and maintenance costs, considerations for durability and ease of implementation. But the real benefit here is, they add some greenery to the street and are really aesthetically pleasing. So they're a great tool to be used either on their own or in combination with other treatments. But they also come with some ongoing maintenance requirements, watering and replanting and things like that, and may require more width. And then as we kind of move up the spectrum, moving into treatments that have a higher degree of physical protection using curbs. So there's two different types of curbs the guide goes into. This example here is using precast concrete curbs. So kind of moderate level of protection, cost is a bit higher, but the advantages here being that it's much more durable and offers a greater physical degree of safety. But there's considerations like stormwater and drainage and how that works and how that passes through the curbs. A similar example, extruded curbs, just a different type of curb material. A little bit more protection is offered here, a bit higher capital cost. But again, a number of the same benefits offering that continuous physical protection and can be implemented quite quickly. And then the final one is looking at concrete barriers. This has the highest degree of protection. So this is something you might be looking at if you have higher volume or higher speed roadways, but with higher capital costs and other considerations. Concrete barriers on their own aren't the most aesthetically pleasing, but you can see this example here from Toronto where they actually worked with artists and commissioned paintings of those concrete curbs to add some public art to the streetscape as well. And so this is a summary here. I won't go through the table here, but it just kind of shows some of the comparisons. So you can kind of see how these different treatments work kind of side by side and what some of the pros and cons are to help your planning and decision making. So there's also opportunities using neighborhood bikeways. What I was speaking about earlier is really what you would do on those busy roadways with protected bike lanes. But if you have low volume, low speed streets and you're looking at doing some traffic calming or traffic diversion, you can use many of the same tools to provide rapid implementation. If you're doing things like a road closure or converting a two-way street to a one-way street or diagonal diverters or median islands, there's opportunities to use some low-cost materials that are shown here, like the example on the bottom right with some concrete barriers and some flex posts to provide just a physical restriction for vehicle traffic, but allowing vehicles to move through the space. And then in Toronto, the example on the left here, they've just kind of used some traffic cones and some flexible posts, but adding in some planters and adding in some paint on the street. And they also have a bike share station here as well. And these are some other examples of other types of traffic calming where you can kind of look at enhancing the streetscape for things like speed humps or tables or raised crosswalks or curb extensions, as you can see, and adding some paint in the example here. So beyond the kind of engineering considerations and looking at the physical types of treatments, this is the piece that gets me really excited, is really the opportunity to make really interesting and beautiful spaces and lots of opportunities to add creative elements to the street here. This is an example in Winnipeg, where one of their protected bike lanes, they commissioned a number of artists to actually paint different themes on the actual bike lanes themselves. So each block had a different theme, a different design theme. So really interesting and neat way to add beautification to the street. I mentioned planters a little bit earlier on. So that's a really great tool that can be used to provide physical protection, but add beautification and greenery to the street. Decorative paint, similar to the example I just showed. Decorative paint can be applied either on the surface of the roadway or the surface of the bike lane itself, like the two examples on the right, or like the example in Toronto, another example of that on the left, kind of adding paint onto concrete barriers. And all of these are opportunities to work with local artists to kind of help define what you actually do to provide decorative paint. It's also can be a powerful engagement approach. The example on the right there was actually part of a project at a local school where they engaged the school community and they did kind of a paint by numbers approach and had the kids actually paint the roadway in one of the cul-de-sacs there. So just some other examples here. Another example, this is the Agnes Greenway in New Westminster, where I think they also used a paint by numbers approach and engaged with the local school and the local community to have them kind of paint and decorate the concrete barriers. But then they also have this nice seating here with some landscaping incorporated in with the seating as well. This is an example just kind of building on Toronto's approach and what they did through their Street Art Toronto program. So they had a project focusing specifically on art projects along cycle tracks and again, worked with local artists and created a number of different themed routes throughout the city using different artists. So really great initiative to kind of engage local artists, but add, local character to each of these streets as well with different themes. And then there's other design elements you could look to as well. These pictures are all from the Agnes Greenway in New Westminster. And for those of you from Metro Vancouver, you know, we get a lot of rain in Metro Vancouver. So we partnered with Happy Cities on this project to provide some rain activated paint. You know, this one here with a cloud and lightning bolts. And then on the ground, a bit of kind of project branding here, as well as some educational stenciling, outlining kind of how to use the facility. So you don't see this when it's dry, you only see it when it's wet. So it helps to kind of celebrate our climate. And in the middle here, we also worked with Happy Cities, where we worked with the school that's across the street here and added some art that was created by the children at a daycare and kind of mounted that onto the flexible post as well. So, you know, you can add lots of creative elements to make these fun and interesting places and also engage with youth and the community. Street furniture is another opportunity here as well. Example on the left here with some nice wooden benches with some nice vegetation, or on the right, adding in some kind of public art elements into what otherwise would be a pretty functional concrete bench, but adding some beautification elements there as well. And there's also opportunities with rapid implementation to kind of coordinate this with other initiatives to provide patios or parklets within your streets. So this is an example in Vancouver, where this is just a two-way protected bike lane on the right, but on the left, as part of this street closure for this block, adding in some benches and umbrellas, and other kind of playful and colorful elements to make it just a more lively and vibrant street. And lots of other examples. I won't describe each of these photos here, but I think this is the part of rapid implementation that can be really fun. And this is a great opportunity to work with your community and with stakeholders, and whoever they may be, whether it's children, youth, or otherwise, or artists, and be creative and think about, you know, what might work well for your street, and think about interactive elements and how you can really create a bicycle facility that's safe and comfortable, but how do you go beyond that to create a vibrant and thriving street? So with that, maybe I will stop sharing my screen, and I think we have some time